Morning from my end of the world. Good evening
Good evening from here.
from your end of the world. My name is Dr. Tovah Goldfine. This is TMS Roundtable Recovery, and we've been going live every week because I'm pretty relentless, just like you, Dr. Hanscom. We have that in common, our
Right.
relentlessness. And you and
I
I
know.
are channeling our relentlessness.
Right.
So I'm happy to welcome you back a second week. We're kind of going live at a little different time. It's nighttime in US, East Coast, West Coast, and it's early morning here in Europe and Israel. And this topic is just so important. And I always call them, takeaway tools or takeaway insights to put in your, I kind of describe like a Mary Poppins bag. Just take that bag and know that you always have a choice. There's something in that bag that you can utilize, that you can, help yourself kind of like come out of what I call, the quicksand and be your own doctor and direct your own care, which we're talking here about Dr. Hanscom's program, which is outstanding. And what we're focusing on today is what Doc Handsome and I can talk about all the time. Repetitive thinking. The other day, client says, yeah, and I have OCD. And I'm like, I have OCD, but I'm a functioning person because I'm dancing with it. I'm understanding it. So we all are human. And I think OCD and ADHD are human behaviors, expressions. Can you further and talk about the serotonin and that people can stop labeling themselves with OCD? Please stop labeling yourself. Thank you.
So this is a tricky topic because just a function of human consciousness is that our thoughts reflect our internal body chemistry or physiology. So the term is called interoception. So if your body's tense, your stomach's in knots, your muscles are tight, you're sweaty, whatever it is, you're in fight or flight. That's your body's physiology or how your body functions. And then what your thoughts are doing, they're reflecting the state of your body's chemistry. So your body's taking in signals from everywhere: temperature, heat, sun, brightness, pain, all these things are coming in. Your body's interpreting those and reacting in order to survive. So when you're in survival mode, your thought patterns can be very unpleasant, negative, and intense. But it's not psychological, it's a physiological state. The reason why it's so critical is that this physiology or the body's survival response is about 1 million times stronger than your conscious brain, 1,000,000 to 1. So we try this psychology of mind over matter. And I'm going to start off with a metaphor of a hornet's nest. So just picture hornet's nest. Hornets are doing their thing, collecting food, building a nest, and whatever they do. And the thoughts, the hornets represent the thoughts outside the nest. And again, they're looking for danger and they're doing their thing. And then somebody comes along and they shake the nest. Well, of course, the hornets get very, very upset and angry. And so the nest represents your brain. And in threat physiology, your brain itself becomes inflamed. So the hornets are outside the nest, very angry. And so what happens is that we're trying to swat these things with bad thoughts with good thoughts. We're trying to deal with the thoughts outside the nest. Well, the real answer is quit shaking the nest. So OCD, or I call them ruminating thoughts, my term is ruts, repetitive, unpleasant thoughts, are considered untreatable by the mental health profession. It's completely solvable.
Wow, I love it.
So I agree the diagnosis of OCD is not a great one to carry around. I had it in extreme form. But everybody's ruminating thoughts, and the labels don't help. So the tipping point where your ruminating thought patterns become OCD is very arbitrary. A lot of people have lots of disruptive thought patterns that are very discomforting. They sort of get normalized that this is part of life. They do not have to be. You do not have to live with these thoughts. So I want to stop there for a second. But the bottom line is, the only thing I want you to remember tonight is that your body's threat physiology drives unpleasant thoughts. And you cannot control the thoughts. You have to calm down the physiology. And that is not being addressed in the mental health world.
I want to listen. I want to keep listening. I would like you to repeat this because this is you've said it every time, and I love it that you say these amazing, like, facts that we can immediately implement. By understanding the unconscious mind is 1,000 times
1 million.
1 million.
Right. Your unconscious brain processes about 20 to 40 million bits of information per second. Guess how much the conscious brain processes? About 40.
So the point is that your unconscious mind has so many more thoughts happening quicker. Like,
no. So remember, human consciousness is a late evolution. So we have 4.5 billion years of body evolving to survive. So it's a whole body response. And the mind is about 100,000 years old. I mean, our neocortex for humans, Homo sapiens, is about 100,000, maybe 200,000 years old. So we have this appendage called human consciousness and language that came along very, very late. So, I mean, I'll just take my cat, for example. And then one of the tragedies of my life is that I'm obsessed with my cat, but my cat's obsessed with my wife. It's just totally tragic. So I get to observe cat behavior a lot. My wife is very upset. But she said, look, the animals don't have consciousness. She's finally convinced me that's not true. Animals have consciousness. They have emotions. And I watch her in action. And so there's certain patterns of behavior that happen every morning. She knows when I get up. She hears the alarm clock go off. She lays down, starts screaming at me to put me on her shoulder to carry her downstairs. And so I wrote a poem called The Cat on My Back. So when I watch those, she looks outside, decides whether it's cold or warm, whether she wants to go in or out. And then what happens with cats, which I find interesting, is that they train us. So about a year ago, she started hopping up on the side of her tub and screaming at us to get the water faucet dripping so she could drink out of the water faucet. We didn't train her to do that. She trained us. So these animals are assessing their environment. They're thinking, they're responding. They have visual input. So I define, we call it the dynamic healing model, that every living creature has to look at their circumstances or their threats and challenges. And then your nervous system with all these sensors takes the input, decides whether it's safe or dangerous. So we call it the input or circumstances. You have the nervous system itself that can be calm or hyperactive. You have the output or the body's chemistry that can be either safety or threat. But what happens is sustained stress physiology that creates symptoms. So the root cause is the interaction between your stresses and your coping skills in terms of physiology. That's what translates into symptoms. It's not psychological. Your body's physiology creates symptoms. So it turns out that, so the term we have for fight or flight response, humans have a term called anxiety. So anxiety is not a psychological construct. It's a physiological state. It's what happens when you feel threatened, you feel anxious, and humans will do anything to avoid that feeling of feeling anxious. We don't like it. There's no rewards in nature for feeling anxious or vulnerable. So my cat feels threatened, and she avoids the threat, or she runs away, comes back in the house. Whatever she does to avoid the threat, she lays down and takes a nap. Humans have a problem that my cat has consciousness. She makes decisions. But thoughts are input or one of the stresses and emotions of what you feel. So my cat has the same reaction where she looks around, she's either calm and relaxed, lays down, stretches out, takes a nap. That would be safety physiology. Or if she's threatened, of course, cats go sort of berserk. And so that's stress physiology. And so when her hair stands up on end and she's hissing away and she's tense as could be, is that psychological? No. It's your body's chemistry, the physiological response to a threat. So humans have the same response, except we call it anxiety. We have a word for it. So anxiety is a result of a threat, not the cause. It's 1,000,000 times stronger than your conscious brain. It is not a psychological issue. It's a physiological response. So the problem that humans have, we have cognitive consciousness. In other words, we have language. So again, my cat assesses the environment. She has thoughts of some sort, but she can't organize it into language or abstract thinking. But her physiology is threat or safety. So thoughts are input, emotions are what you feel. So she has emotions. She feels scared, she feels safe, she responds accordingly. And if you think about the human experience, we act mostly on the way we feel. I tell you, well, worried about a person we live in a tough neighborhood, so I worry about a person coming in tonight and breaking into our house. Well, I'm not stressed by that. It's just a thought. I'm not really reacting to it. But if somebody started breaking into my house, my reaction would be totally different. In other words, I would have a bodily response to that physical threat. The problems that humans have is that we have thoughts. So the research shows that thoughts, unpleasant thoughts, are also a threat that have the same reaction in the body as a physical threat. And so we feel anxious, we have fight or flight. The problem with thoughts, okay, so we have thoughts coming at us that are unpleasant and we experience them. So we're in fight or flight. What do we do? So we have our thoughts coming in, creating a stress reaction. And then the stress reaction, of course, makes the thoughts worse. So what do we do with these? What do we tend to do with these unpleasant thoughts?
Well, we either stuff them because we can't deal with them, or our body goes into a greater reaction because we have not learned how to respond, which is one of the the ways to bring safety and calm. But obviously we begin to react more, so it becomes conflict.
Right. Big cycle. The research shows that when you suppress thoughts, and that's what I did, I was a master at suppression. I was very good about controlling my emotions, controlling my thoughts, and I got sick. I had 17 different physical and mental symptoms.
I keep saying 19. Did I miss 2?
Well, we can add I can add a couple. I mean, I look backwards, it's probably more. But I had migraine headaches, I had severe anxiety, I developed a full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder. And what I didn't know is that anxiety, depression, bipolar, OCD, and schizophrenia are all the same thing. They're all inflammatory disorders. They are not psychological.
Wow.
Same thing with Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, cardiac disease, peripheral vascular disease, cancer, osteoporosis, autoimmune disorders are all inflammatory threat disorders. So with every chronic illness, mental and physical, comes from the same root cause of sustained threat physiology. So I want to stop just for a second. So what's threat physiology? That means adrenaline and cortisol, your heart rate goes up, you sweat, your muscles get tense, you're getting ready to go into fight or flight. But also your immune system fires up, called cytokines fire up, and your brain itself becomes inflamed. The nerve conduction doubles. You become hypersensitive.
The brain really becomes inflamed.
Half your brain is glial cells. And a significant portion of those are called microglia, which are inflammatory cells. So we think of the brain in terms of a circuit board. There's 80 billion neurons. They're all separated by space called a synapse, and that's only half the brain. The other half are these glial cells that support the neurons, and a significant portion of those are these glial cells, which are actually inflammatory cells. So your brain itself gets inflamed, and it literally short circuits. The nerve conduction doubles in your periphery. So again, I had 17 different physical and mental symptoms, migraine headaches, skin rashes, all sorts of stuff. They're all gone. And how can that be? How can 17 different symptoms resolve? And again, I didn't do this very well. I finally learned how to do this after 20 years, but I learned inadvertently how to calm my body down. And so what happens is you calm down your body. So again, the essence of all chronic disease, mental and physical, is sustained exposure to stress or threat physiology. The essence of healing is that you learn tools to regulate your physiology from threat to safety. There's some tipping point when you have enough safety, your body regenerates and heals. So people come to me and say, well, I want my ruts fixed. I want you to stop these thought patterns. So again, you're trying to fight the hornets out of the nest. So what has to really happen is you have to learn how to heal. And your body rests and regenerates. You create new neurons. You develop a whole new nervous system. And these thoughts do resolve. They go away. Now, in the mental health world, this is considered unheard of. And I'll just tell you one young story of somebody in the South, a young professional who was 35 years old. He came to me for another reason, and turned out he had severe OCD. He'd been battling it for about 15 years. He had read about 100 self-help books. He tried medications. There's all sorts of strategies that he tried that I had tried. There's thought blocking. There's snapping a band on your wrist. There's, you name it. And so he'd been through it all. And the problem is when you're trying to avoid the thoughts, inadvertently, you're actually reinforcing them. So
Very good, very important point about that kind of like paradox. Very
yeah.
important point. Can you say it again,
So the
please?
healing occurs through neuroplasticity. I think Bonnie's on tonight. I think she said she's going to be on. We maybe ever comment here in a second. So Bonnie Lester has a nice term. I call it healing through creativity. She calls it healing through neuroplasticity. But you're also just creating a new brain. We can't go into a lot of detail tonight about how to do that. That's what the Doc Journey course does. Takes you through a sequence of actually calming down and healing your brain. But the bottom line is that the more you fight these thoughts, you're now giving them energy.
Beautiful.
So what happens, you train your brain not to react to them. You train your brain not to react to the mental pain. You train your brain not to react to the physical pain. And as you learn to be with your pain, not to be okay with it, not to accept it, you already know from our conversations before, I do not like the word acceptance in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
Are
We
okay
agreed to
that?
disagree, and we actually came to an incredible agreement, and I understood. And it is a very different word, awareness, and it definitely is absolutely. I evolved from acceptance to awareness. For some people, they're at the place of acceptance, but you have to evolve to the aware. The awareness is what's going to set you free.
You're right. You create that space, but I mean, pain is always supposed to be unacceptable. It's a danger signal. And so if you try to manipulate that into something less than it actually is, this is danger, then you're giving it more power inadvertently. And we'll talk about the ego in a second. So one of the ways that we deal with unpleasant thoughts is we suppress them. Turns out that suppression actually shrinks the brain. It shrinks the memory center of the brain called the hippocampus. Again,
Suppressing our thoughts shrinks the brain. Suppressing
Yes.
our thoughts shrinks the brain.
Physically shrinks it. Also, a higher chance of opioids, depression, suicide, all that comes with repressing thoughts is deadly. What else do we do? So I'm going to, again, there's 4 parts of healing. I'm going to quickly review the first 2. The first is thought separation. The thoughts are here. You can't control them. But there's ways of separating from them with awareness, mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, expressive writing. Those are all ways of separating from your thoughts that we won't go into tonight. But you can't control your thoughts, but you can separate from them. They're here, you're here. So like physical pain, the first step in healing, by the way, with physical pain and mental pain, people start becoming curious, they look at it. So instead of reacting to it, they create that space. And it's an odd, I can't put it into words, but it happened again today in our group. We just get that space in your brain that, okay, here's the pain, here I am. But your pain's protective. It's trying to protect you. It's a gift. So the second part is, calming down the nervous system. There's a bunch of ways of doing that. And so when you're trapped, so when something threatens you, you have threat physiology and you become anxious. What happens if you can't solve the threat? What happens next?
It's not about solving. It's not about solving. It's about.
Let's say you're truly trapped by finances, circumstances, relationships, pain, whatever it is, you're truly trapped, which creates anxiety because that's a threat. So you're trapped. What's your body going to do next? It's going to fight.
Yeah.
And you're going to get dead. It's like, so what happens, you get more of an intense chemical reaction, which we call anger. We try to get rid of the words anger and anxiety to say, like, this is activated threat physiology. This is hyperactivated threat physiology. The problem with anger, it has dopamine, which is addicting. So anger allows approach behavior. You're going to fight to the death if you have to survive. So anger is that last-ditch effort to survive. Again, it's a survival reaction that's intense. And when you're trapped in pain, it's really intense. But every human being is trapped by their thoughts. So the second part of the healing is calming the nervous system. And again, way too big a topic for tonight. But again, that's part of the Doc Journey. The third part, which is a really big deal, I think particularly relevant to Israel right now, is that, okay, we have the survival physiology that feels bad. Then we get programmed by our society, people, friends, parents about who we should be. And so I've written a blog called Quit Looking for Your Authentic Self. It's right here in front of you. Right
I
here,
love it.
every second of your life is part of your programming. So how you react to the next situation.
Is that like wherever you go, there you are?
Yeah, we're just right here. So the problem is, the reason and this is where we got a little bit of a disagreement the other day about self-love. But let's talk about ruts for a second. And I mean, I understand the issue. I like the words, the concepts, but they actually make the ruts worse.
Yeah.
In a big way. Because one of the things that we do is that we create this thing called ego to feel better about ourselves. We have all these negative stories coming at us that don't make us feel very good. Then we have this threat physiology, which makes us feel bad. And so to feel better about ourselves, we create a language and a story about ourselves so we have a place in the world that we feel good about. But the problem is we're using a conscious construct to deal with this massive programming in your threat physiology. So we create this identity or ego, and then we double down on it. And what happens with repetition, we develop mental rigidity. This is who I am. This is what I can do, what I can't do. You get strong opinions. You get really fixed in your attitudes and patterns. And if you think about this ego thing, it's actually a group of cognitive distortions. I'm a loser. I'm a winner. I'm this. I'm that. There's should thinking. Just the label of being whatever is labeling. That's a cognitive distortion. So when you look at this carefully, is that ego is a story we create about ourselves based on our concept of reality to feel better about ourselves. Once you learn to be with your threat physiology, quit reacting to it, not take it personally, and you realize that you're a product of your program, that you actually don't have to listen to it anymore, your ego starts to mellow out. So mental rigidity actually crosses essentially every psychiatric diagnosis. It's a common core characteristic of every characteristic diagnosis. The reason why, and I don't have to say this because we're in Israel right now with a lot of stuff going on over there, but it's actually the essence of evil. This language thing that humans have is that we're think about humans in general. We are an angry, reactive species. No other species on this planet does what we do to each other.
Wow.
And, my cat or other animals will get angry to get food. They'll get aggressive. They'll fight to defend themselves. They'll fight to defend their young. But in between their battles, they're not angry all the time. Humans have language. We are trapped by our thoughts. We're also trapped by many circumstances. We're also trapped over these stories. So at the end of the day, we are all human beings. And then instead of putting labels on each other, we should be using descriptions. So I think Epictetus, this is one of my favorite books ever. It's called The Art of Living by Sharon Labelle, the modern translation of Epictetus, who was a Greek Stoic philosopher. And basically he points out one thing about labeling, which is very, very good, is that don't call a person a drunk. You can say this is a person who drinks too much, but a drunk is a label and the other one's a description. Or you live in Israel and you happen to practice the Jewish religion, or you live in Palestine and happen to practice a different religion. Those are descriptions. When the descriptions turn into labels, again, all this thing about self-esteem, and let's take with the word ego. Okay, I'm a certain person in a certain country doing certain things. I have a story. But to do something bad to another person requires the label of being, I am more than you are. So we put on this ego that becomes our badge of honor. We get really involved in our ego and we lose ourselves. So as you, again, learn to separate from your thoughts, learn to calm down the physiology, the need for an ego starts to soften. And so the antidote to mental rigidity is mental flexibility, not resilience. But if you just consider a bamboo crow in a hurricane.
So mental rigidity, and we want to move to mental flexibility.
Right, which is a learned skill. It takes practice. But the metaphor I like to use is that of a bamboo grove. This has been used by, I'm not the originator of this concept, but I think Bruce Lee had a comment about, when you deal with, adversity, then what the bamboo grove does in the face of a hurricane or monsoon, it just lays down. The wind passes, it just stands right back up.
Wow.
That's flexibility. You quit having to defend your ego. I mean, think of the human misery caused by this need to defend our ego. So I asked people, why do you need an ego? But another one came up, which I thought was interesting, which is probably correct, is that we're a competitive species. So whatever identity you build is going to be powerful, bulletproof, whatever it is. So you become bulletproof to the world and you become bulletproof to yourself. You spend a tremendous amount of cognitive energy trying to defend this thing we call ego. And so for me personally, that was a huge one of my issues. I came from a very abusive background. I developed my identity around ideals. I mean, every ideal in the world, that was David Hanscom. And I remember reading Joseph Campbell one day saying that idealism is dangerous. I'm going, what are you talking about? Because my entire life was connected to ideals. So just as one example, I had an ideal of becoming a compassionate doctor. Well, it sounds good, and I acted like that, and I did a pretty good job, except I was connected to the label. I actually couldn't really hear you because I was so busy being compassionate. That makes sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So healing occurs through connection, and your ego flat out blocks connection to yourself and to other people. Or if we're in a group of people interacting, and people in the 1600s called this a bunch of zombies floating around, is that it's your facade interacting with my facade. I don't know who you are. I just know what the facade is that's hanging out there. Anyway, we could talk a long time about that one because that's a huge, huge issue, which I think is a source of human misery. And I think ego and our capacity to, not capacity, our inability to maintain it is what creates human misery. It creates a lot of evil behavior. So this is a human survival problem.
Yeah. Like, let's break it down, just like simplify it for the listeners. You know, when somebody's in pain, high symptoms, number 10, there's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of judgment.
Right.
There's anger, there's fear.
Right.
You know, and then that starts this cycle. And then there's this ego. Why can't I do this? How many people do we meet that have actually healed, pain, and then it comes back again, and they're so pissed at themselves? Like how about that cycle? However it's happening, your personality and how you react or respond is helping you or hurting you.
So let me ask you a philosophical question, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this. And we may have touched on this the other day, but do you and I have a right to be alive?
Yeah, I love when you ask this because then I get to think about it again. No, I don't have a right to be alive.
Every creature on this planet has to compete for resources.
Right.
It can be with strength, with wisdom, creating a tribe, organizing people into powerful situations. Humans went to the top of the food chain by actually cooperation.
We're talking about survival of the fittest.
Well, it's also survival of the most anxious. It is. I mean, the species who didn't pay attention to these cues just didn't survive. So survival of the fittest now means acute wits, learning, smartness, using computers to control masses of people, which we know what happens in that world. So what happens is that the antidote to anxiety is control. The more power you have, the more control you have. So that's why there's this relentless need for power, because the people at the top are the ultimate cowards. They're driven by anxiety. And I mean, look, there's, again, a huge discussion around this one. But this process of actually processing our thoughts and not taking them personally, again, separating from the thoughts, calming the nervous system, allowing the ego to dissolve, in other words, becoming more flexible, would change the human experience. Humans have learned how to physically survive, but we're using the same approaches to emotionally survive that we use to physically survive. It's the same tools, and they're not very nice. The reason why I bring that up, okay, so I have a bad day. Somebody gypped me out of some money, somebody almost hit me in traffic, and different things happen to me every day. So your capacity to stay alive means competing for resources, which means there's going to be adversity. So people expect to not have, because people think to be out of pain, that they're not going to have adversity. And then they get irritated and frustrated when they have adversity. What do you expect?
Yeah.
So is that unmeetable expectation of not having adversity makes you more angry, fires up the physiology more, your brain goes more offline, your thoughts get worse, right? So again, I don't like the word accepting adversity because it's not acceptable, but it's the way we stay alive. We're competing for resources. And, it depends where you live. Some people win that battle more than others, but we're competitive species. We're also an angry, reactive species. And we're competing like crazy for dwindling resources. But even the days where there are plenty of resources, and 2,000 years ago, we still fought each other. I mean, humans are a very angry, reactive species. So, but we're in our reptile brain, not our thinking brain. We're reacting, 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 and that's why one of the themes for me going forward is going from reactive to creative. So, if you take the letter C on the middle of the word reactive,
Yeah, I love
to
it.
the
That was
beginning of the word,
what were you smoking when you thought of that? That was
I
so
don't know,
creative.
it came out of the blue.
So
That's
creative, so
right.
beautifully like unfolded, reactive to creative.
Right. So you have to see first. And there's a little book I have. I've told you about this multiple times. The book The Way to Love by
I
DeMello,
know.
and he defines love as awareness.
Yeah.
So that's commitment to other people's well-being, but I have to see who you are before I can actually interact with you in a meaningful way. So he defines love, plain and simple, as awareness.
Yeah.
So can we talk about a little bit what I talked about tonight with you about the self-love problem?
Yeah, let's touch on that. Let's touch on that because it's important because, when it boils down to, we all want love, we all want connection, and that's where you do a beautiful thing in your work with connecting and joy. So you get around to it, but in your own way. So I'd love to make a connection because, I do promote the movie Love Heals, and it's an incredible concept, and it's a beautiful movie about, ways people can apply and implement many of the Eastern, methods of whatever. The point is, look, I cried the other day, to a friend because I was like, I just want to live in a world where there's love and peace. And my friend was very rational and said, well, we need darkness to get to that. And I'm like, why? Why can't we just get to the love and the light? Why do we have to go through the pain and the darkness? And that's kind of like the cycle of our human nature and what has happened. But let's not go off on a Tovah tangent. Let's stay focused. So go ahead. Love may heal or not heal, or let's just break it down. Since you were in that movie.
So what heals? Remember, he defines love as awareness.
Yeah.
The problem is you say self-love. Remember, the sense of self or ego is what creates so much havoc in this world, right?
Yes.
And so the more we defend it, the worse it gets. So then you have to create this cognitive construct of who self is, right? And that takes mental energy, which is 1/1,000,000th as strong as your unconscious survival reaction. So we're trying to create this self-love to feel better about ourselves in the face of this survival physiology. The key issue is to separate from it. Quit taking this survival physiology personally. Let it be. Let us do its job. Thank it. It's protecting you. It's what you have. It's not who you are. So you get your ego identity separated from the survival physiology, and then you're going to go over here and you're going to create a new brain. So the final aspect of this journey is creating the nervous system of your choice. So your brain goes where you want it to go. I've used the metaphor of learning a new language. So the way you learn French is practicing French. The way you learn a good life is practicing a good life. You're not going to learn French by not speaking English. Just not speaking English doesn't create French. So our default language is survival, and that's where we go to because we have to stay alive. And so you have to separate from that, let it do its thing. Then you create the language that I call an enjoyable life. So you practice living that good life. And so I wrote a little quote to have a good life. You have to live a good life. It doesn't matter what the adversity is. And I know the adversity you're going through in Israel is beyond words, but I think we've all read the book Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's book. And I don't want to even hardly bring that up because I think the suffering that is going on over in your part of the world is beyond words. And I don't think I would react very well to it. And I also I want to honor people that are suffering at that level because the doctrine is fine. It makes a big difference. I think 1 in 10 million people, if that could do what Viktor Frankl did, where he found meaning in life in the middle of a severe concentration camp, as bad as it gets. And so he kept asking the question, what is life asking of me now? It's an incredible story, but almost impossible to do. And that's the downside of the book. So under severe adversity, without having a home, shelter, food, basic, whatever, the doc journey concepts aren't that relevant. If your basic needs to food, air, water, safety aren't being met physically, you're not going to overcome that very easily. Now, you can do some tools to help it. As you become less reactive to the true adversity that you have, you become more creative and thinking better to find your way out of it. And some situations are so dire that it's impossible. But I would only encourage, and comes from my background, also being quite abusive, and this is a common theme with almost everybody I work with, is that I don't know why abuse is so common in the human experience, but a lot of it's horrible, really, really bad abuse. So my point being that when you come out of the dire physical situation, you can decide to hold on to it and make your life miserable the rest of your life, or you can understand that I have today, and I'm going to program my brain today to get where I want it to go, to live the life I'm going to live. If I want to stay angry at the people that harmed me, it makes no sense. Because now what's happened is that the person I least want to take away my quality of life is a person that I hate. And this might be a different podcast, but Fred Luskin's a good friend of mine. I'm having lunch with him tomorrow. We meet once a month. He wrote the book called Forgive for Good. Have you read that book, Tovah?
No, but I quote it a lot.
And Fred and I have this ongoing discussion. So anger is just the sensation generated when you're trapped. It's extreme stress physiology. It's not a psychological construct. Then when you look at his book, the tools in there are actually not forgiveness. It's simply the way you deal with anger is you simply lower the stress chemistry.
Wow.
And I'm not going to go into that right now, but here's the problem. The word forgiveness is way too big of a word. I mean, the concept's sort of right, but you have a person that's treated you badly with ongoing abuse, or somebody really ripped you off a lot of money or hurt your kids. You don't have to forgive them. I'm sorry. I know it sounds heretical, because what happens is an obstacle, because some things are just not that forgivable, or you can sort of go into denial and think you're forgiving this person. Bottom line is they hurt you badly, and we call it flipping the switch. Okay, this person's a jerk, they're a bad person, they really hurt me, but I don't want that person that I really dislike in my life today.
Right.
So Fred calls it reframing, I call it flipping the switch. So anger is powerful, it's addicting, nobody ever wants to give it up. You can't give it up, it's a survival reaction. So we call it flipping the switch, that I'm tired of being a victim. I'm going to simply go a different direction, and I refuse to have this person in my life today, whether it's your mother or father or your enemy or whatever it is. When you can get back on your feet and have physical comforts taken care of, what do you do then? Do you hold on to the situation, or do you actually live a fruitful life? There's a huge difference there. So Fred said, well, the word's been around for millennia. I go, guess what, Fred? The word hasn't worked. It hasn't. Because forgiveness means too much to many different people. So the bottom line is you had a person who's hurt. You just do not want them in your life today. You simply flip the switch and go a different direction. So it's one of our basic ways of calming the physiology, simply flipping the switch.
Yeah. No. It's a big conversation, but I did want to really touch on something very practical in more, where I'm working on here in the fields, with some of these people who when their pain level is a 10 and they know it's neuroplastic, but surely the way that the body can react and the way the body can express is it's not something we have. Like, in other words, the pain. There are people who are having pain and it's physical. The cause is emotional. They know it. We've discussed it. We've done counseling about it, but they're having a day of number 10. And so I would like to just address it for a minute, because what I sometimes do is even send them your 2-minute YouTube about lowering the stressors.
Right.
Because at that moment at 10, it's an opportunity, and they're like, right, doc, thank you very much. Hang up the phone. Like, here's an opportunity for you to practice, because we're not going to learn it on the yoga mat. Now they're at a 10, and I've been advised, from my teachers, because I'm a memory processing certified practitioner, and Strubner will tell me you can't really help someone in number 10 lower their stressors, but at some point I've got to figure out how to guide them. Like, can you just give us some practical, because there are people so suffering, but they come out of the 10 and they're like, I'm back in, let's do it, let's keep working. Like, they get it. But when they're at that 10 and their brain is under threat and so reacting, fight, flight, freeze mechanism, and the pain is great, I almost for a minute, like, oh my God, like, I don't have the answer, but
every person I work with, essentially the person starts in that spot, 10 out of 10 pain, totally trapped. I call it the abyss. And that's where people start every time. Darkness is darkness. It doesn't matter how you got there. Dark is dark. So I say, look, we're here just to learn that you have to understand how pain works. So I'm going to modify your language just a little bit. And this is hard to explain. I'm going to
please. I'm open to feedback. At 67, I'm open to feedback.
Emotions are your physiology. Period. In other words, people want to put a psychological construct under emotions. Emotions are what you feel. You're feeling your physiology. Period. That's it. And thoughts are input. Okay, so that's the psyche. But also a hot stove, all sorts of other things are input. But unpleasant thoughts are input that you cannot escape. So you break it up into emotion to what you feel. And what I'm trying to say is that there's no such thing as emotional pain versus physical pain, because they are exactly the same thing. Exactly. It's inflammatory response, whether it's physical pain or mental pain, the brain's on fire, it physically is inflamed. And so that's what I'm saying, it's really critical to talk about, well, they really feel the pain. Well, of course they are. We also know that people don't actually tolerate emotional pain. We have no protection from emotional pain. There's no automatic withdrawal response from emotional pain like there is physical pain. And what they've shown in the laboratory is that your body will actually create physical pain as opposed to experiencing emotional pain.
Wow.
Your body will create the pain or choose that. And one gross example, which I'm quite familiar with, is cutting. Teenagers, people cut, not just teenagers. And somehow they can see the pain, they have some control over it. Remember, with emotional pain, you have no control. So you can't control physical pain, you can't control emotional pain. But that language is really difficult. You might know I don't use the word mind body anymore, or TMS. It's just either threat physiology or safety physiology. And keep it really simple, is that when you're in threat physiology, your brain's on fire, the sensations are unpleasant. And for me personally, when I talk to my patients very carefully, the mental pain is the bigger problem. They cannot tolerate these thoughts. Now, if they have severe physical pain, again, the body's on fire, your brain's on fire, your limbic system is sending out really nasty signals. So whether it's physical pain or mental pain, it's incredibly uncomfortable. Then you're trapped. Dr. Sarno, who's a very famous rehab doctor, called it rage. And so you're totally trapped by an unpleasant sensation. For me personally, I had extreme unpleasant thought patterns, considered unsolvable. But what happens is that the physiology has not been addressed in the mental health or the medical world. We're not calming the physiology down. So thoughts had to be dealt with in their own specific manner. The physiology is not hard to control, by the way. It's a whole process of doing that. The ego softens on its own. You can't just break up the ego, but just becoming aware of what the ego is doing. And again, DeMello's book, The Way to Love, the way to awareness is what starts breaking up your ego. And he's probably 100 years ahead of his time, because he really describes neuroscience really well. That we're so programmed by every second of our lives, we basically become what everybody else thinks we should be. So becoming aware what the programming is, just the awareness in his mind, is what breaks us up. And I used to not believe this, and it is profound. So then the final part is creating the brain that you want. So it might be 5 minutes of a cup of coffee, calling a friend, whatever it is. And as you well know, one of our basic rules of life is never, ever, ever, ever discuss your pain, medical care, be critical, criticism, complain, no negativity. Because you might be right and justified, but gossip is a big one. And I know the Jewish religion is called what? Lash Haran? Is that the
Oh
word?
my God, Lashon Hara,
What
the
is it?
Lashon Hara, which means bad tongue.
Right.
Lashon is tongue, so they're saying like it's the tongue. So interesting that you mentioned that.
Well, it's deadly. And what I don't understand in our country right now, maybe around the world, is how can our politicians be so malignant in public, slander, make up names? It's insane. I mean,
Yeah,
in almost
it
every
didn't used to
culture,
be that way. It didn't used to be that way. There's a shift in the
right.
universe.
So as a society, we're in pain. And by talking about it, discussing about it, complaining, no advice, no criticism, no gossip, no negativity, period. I said, Tovah, you're in my office. When you walk out this door, you will never discuss your pain ever again with anybody, especially your family. Ever. Absolute stop to talking about your pain. No negativity. It's next to the expressive writing. It's a major, major starting point in healing. And if you persist, I say, look, I'm not your person. I cannot help you. If you cannot simply, it's a concrete thing to do, right? Very concrete. And I would challenge the listeners, just try that once. Don't read my book. Just start, do that one process of zero negativity. None. Absolute. It'll take at least 6 weeks to stop it because we're so used to it. We've normalized it a lot. That is a huge factor because your input's unpleasant. You now sensitize your nervous system. You're in threat physiology. How's that helping you by being negative?
So, is there any wiggle room between the Facebook pages where people are asking for advice and talking
No, no.
about their
Well, no, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to talk. Remember, the emphasis is on the tools. So, no, I'm
right,
happy to teach the tools, and that's what I do.
right?
And when I start discussing the pain in detail, I'd say, even when I was in practice, I obviously made sure I understood the symptoms to understand, is this a serious problem or not? Do I need to order a diagnostic test or not? I never assumed anything, but that was it. They want to start telling me about their troubles or their pain or what this was doing or how they could do that. Done. Off the table. So I didn't talk about it either. So this sounds crazy. I listened to my patients. I enjoy my patients. I didn't talk to my patients. Because you talk about the problems, you actually reinforce the problem. You want your brain on the solution. I wrote a website post recently called Quit Fighting Darkness, Just Turn on the Light. A lot easier. If you want to wallow in it, actually, I didn't make a mistake. I know this might irritate some of your listeners, but I wrote an article for Pain News Network called Wallowing in Your Pain. It's very addicting. One of the worst prognostic factors for chronic pain is belong to a chronic pain support group. And when I do my coaching, again, I had to have a conversation today with a couple people where in the group it's absolutely forbidden to even hint that you're in pain. We talk about tools and concepts, what strategies we're using to learn to deal with stress and adversity, but we never ever discuss pain. And one of the worst prognoses for fibromyalgia, by the way, this has been well documented, is belonging to a fibromyalgia support group.
Mm.
And they discuss the pain, and people feel like they're bonding on pain. It's sort of a pseudo bonding. I mean, if I bond with you about your pain and your troubles, I mean,
Right,
I
like
don't know who you
I
are.
feel better for 1 second when we commiserate that we're both uncomfortable. For maybe a millisecond, I feel okay, and then I'm back in the
Right.
problem.
Yeah, it's just a really basic. I mean, we used to run workshops in New York, which I probably will do again. And one of the basic rules was not discussing your pain. And people would look at me and go, well, what do I talk about? And what we discovered, and then people would sneak out behind the buildings to talk about their pain, like smoking cigarettes in high school.
Yeah.
And so it's addicting. It's hard to stop. It's a behavioral pattern. But if a person, I mean, it happened today. A person's been in pain, been in my group. I said, well, are you doing expressive writing? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Are you talking about your pain? She goes, well, yeah. And I go, stop. And I said, if you can't, honestly, I feel bad because if you really can't stop talking about your pain, take a break. Don't come back to my group. Take a break. And it's a very concrete step, right? It's harder than it looks, a lot harder. It's easy to get pulled back into negative conversations, especially gossip. But just stop.
Isn't it reinforcing the obsessive thinking to talk? It's reinforcing the roots.
You
the
mean
ruts.
not discussing your pain or discussing your pain?
Discussing your pain is reinforcing the ruts.
Well, people say, who do I talk to? I said, well, that's what the piece of paper is for. Just express your frustration on the piece of paper, let it go. Remember, you're separating from your thoughts. And when you talk to somebody else, you're somehow looking for a solution. Remember, when you're trying to solve your pain, the pain is running the show. So what you're doing is separating from the pain, you're letting go, then you're allowing your body to heal. So again, I tell people, don't believe David Hanscom, don't believe in the Doc journey. You don't generate enough belief to heal. That's very, very counterproductive. And I'm actually honestly quite humbled by the fact that the science has been there. Mainstream medicine has somehow missed it badly. And so my vision is I get so tired of seeing people badly damaged by unnecessary spine surgery, I just cannot do it anymore. So I'm watching hundreds of people go to pain-free, not just doing better, but pain-free, including me. 17 symptoms are gone. I had migraine headaches. My ears are ringing. My feet were burning. Skin rashes, stomach issues. I mean, you name it. Extreme anxiety, OCD, bipolar, all this stuff. I did not realize until about 5 years ago that they're actually the same problem at the mitochondrial, DNA, cellular level. It's all the same stuff.
Wow. So you yourself learned to bring safety and regulate your nervous system. And now you were the first one who taught me that, we have these neurocircuits. I call them these like pathways, or like the, like the road 7, like road 7. That road is our default, and it's one of threat. So we don't get rid of that. We build a new pathway, a new road that's stronger, that's safety. So you still get that sensation of threat. And then you're like, but you immediately go to safety, and then the body's regulated. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. But remember, it's about the skill set. So again, people get upset when they have adversity. Well, again, what do you expect? How are you going to stay alive if you can't process adversity? Nobody's going to give you life. Nobody's going to hand you life on the paddle. So if you think you're not going to have adversity, that's an unmeetable expectation that's going to piss you off when it happens. So being angry about adversity actually makes it way worse. So the adversity is bad enough. Nobody says you should enjoy that. That's why I don't like the word acceptance very well. But you can't be upset about adversity, because that is life. That's just life. Your basic. So the metaphor I use in my Doc journey is that of a ski slope. And the rule is that you walk up to the ski slope and you're given a ticket. You're not given a choice of which slope you're going to ski. And for any of you that have skied or can visualize this, if you're on top of a hill that's above your skill level, it is terrifying. The snow is slippery. You have these metal things on your feet that are not easy to control if you don't know the technique. And it's steep. So if you're on a hill steeper than your skill level, it is terrifying. And it's happened to all of us. And so what happens, the course is broken up into 4 levels of beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. And so if you're an expert skier on a green slope, no problem. You're in safety physiology. Or a blue skier on a blue slope, intermediate skier on an intermediate slope, fine, no problem. If you're a green skier on a blue slope or intermediate slope, things get a little bit dicey, actually pretty dicey. But think about being a green level skier, beginner skier on a double black diamond expert hill. See, the problem with skiing, the reason why it's a reasonable metaphor is that you have to get down the hill. And people say, I don't want to become an expert skier. Well, guess what? Life doesn't give you those choices. Life is a double black diamond event. And so if you're a green, so what happened to me personally, I became a double black diamond profession. There's probably nothing more stressful than spine surgery. And I had green beginner level stress skills. I had no skills. My only defense for this extreme stress was to stuff it, suppress it. And so I was tough. I could go through anything. Being a spine surgery is a very nerve-wracking process for everybody. We always act like it's not, but it's a lot of stress. So
I can't even imagine like you. I can't even imagine like literally going into a spine. I mean, I dissected a cadaver in chiropractic school, so I've seen the beauty of what's inside of a body, but we're just having to get comfy with it all the time.
Yeah, it's a tough profession. It's probably the most stressful.
But you loved it, something you loved it, and you were challenged by it, and you were competitive with it.
Right, but if I got into a case that was above my skill level, it was a nightmare. And it happens. So the really good spine surgeons know what they can and can't do. They're not afraid to refer to somebody who's more competent. Or a beginner surgeon wants to look tough and actually just do it no matter what. And a lot of bad things happen. You have no idea. But anyway, the bottom line is I was in double black diamond professional spine surgery. I had green beginner level skills as far as life stresses, and I get really, really sick. And this is not exactly a positive note to finish the podcast on, but there's a direct link between. So the worst part of my deal was the ruminating thoughts. By far and away, my worst pain was the mental pain. And so I was suicidal in 2002 when I lived in Sun Valley, actively suicidal, started to commit the process. And I have 20 medical colleagues dead from suicide. And see, the more of a well-intentioned person you are, you give more meaning to these unpleasant sensations. So as the well-meaning people have more ruminating thought patterns. So it turns out that the thoughts you're suppressing are actually who you are not. You wouldn't suppress them in the first place. So your demons are actually who you are not. So there's a direct research link between ruminations and suicide. And other animals don't commit suicide like humans do. So it's that inability to escape your thoughts is what actually does a lot of people in. Or it acts out as aggression on other people. And we're seeing what's happening around the world as far as aggression right now. So again, just an overall review. There's 4 parts to healing. One is, I call it thought separation. The second part is turning down the heat, lowering the physiology. The third part is allowing your ego or mental rigidity to soften. And the final part is neuroplasticity, where you literally create a new nervous system. And it's consistent, it can happen quickly. When people do the doctrinates, I say, look, 10 or 15 minutes a day, that is it.
Yeah.
And people say, well, how long does it take? I go, well, that's the wrong question. How long does it take to become a concert pianist?
I love it. Wrong question.
Wrong question. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I'm way better than I was even a year ago. I'm even better in the last 6 weeks because things keep clicking into place, right?
Yeah.
So once you start feeling better, you've actually just started the journey.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm excited about it, as you can tell. And
no, I needed these. We spoke a few months ago, then we spoke last week and this week, and I really am comfortable with the language. I'm still speaking it from Tovah, but I'm understanding it so much clearer. And I thank you because I do these shows because I want to learn so I can help people, but I also want people to take away things. But I love when I can understand something and not just hearing something that I can agree with, but I'm learning. And I was not 100% clear even when we first met, a few years ago. So it's a wonderful program, the Doc Journey, and I'm gonna recommend it. And it's simple and it's not expensive, and it's from A to Z, and it's clear and it's thorough. Here's the key: it's not something you keep in your head. You're going to have to apply and implement every day for the rest of your life. But in order to stay imbalanced and have out of threat, it's worth it. It's an incredibly wonderful program with or without the group therapy. It can be successful, absolutely successful.
By the way, the group coaching is actually designed for people in your time zone. We have people from England, Spain.
Yeah.
You're 1 hour ahead of that.
Yeah.
And so it's at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which is about 10 o'clock your time.
10 o'clock. Yeah. And it's amazing. And you show up and people want to meet you and people are interacting. It's very na'im. This is a word very nice in Hebrew. It's a wonderful program. And, it covers all bases. When you think about it, it's got the journaling, it covers the meditation. It talks so much about joy and creativity, which is something we just forget because we're like into fixing ourselves, and then I'll be happy and then I'll be joyful. Right. Be joyful now because that's the placebo. That's the medicine,
Right.
So I love what you do, and I'm going to keep promoting it. And maybe like once every 6 weeks or so, we'll come on here because even from last week, you repeated things. And not only did it become more clear to me, there's nothing new under the sun.
I'm sorry?
There's nothing new under the sun.
Absolutely.
These are universal laws of nature and healing.
David Hanscom is not the best thing since sliced bread. The doctor is not the best thing since sliced bread. But these healings are miraculous. Yeah. But it's not me. The human body is a miracle.
Yeah.
And so when you turn the body loose and allow it to heal, it is stunning what happens. People, I'm going to give you one example. For instance, as your inflammatory markers go down, there's a layer of skin called the subdermis, which is just right underneath the epidermis. And on histology slides, it actually regenerates. You actually regenerate the thickness of your skin. You actually look younger.
Wow. Yeah.
So, anyways, I mean, the body's
Amazing.
incredible.
No, I want to end the show with this, with the quote from Ben Gurion, who was the first prime minister, who says that you have to be a realist to believe in miracles.
Absolutely. Yep,
Yeah.
there you go. Love it.
So on that note, I thank you so much. Have a good night, you and your cat and your wife and that whole drama with the cat. And I'm going to go on with my day, and we will meet again for sure.
All right.
Okay, thank you, my dear. All the best. 1 second. Let me just answer this with the